So Steve, it's showtime and the floor is yours. Please enjoy. Please enjoy your very persuasive and exciting talks. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kawai-san. I want to thank Murasaka-san so much for inviting me and actually to allow me to wear the lucky green jacket. He told me that we were speaking downstairs, it would be quite warm. This jacket is the jacket I wore on the very first time I took over the campaign in August when I told President, or then candidate Trump, you have a 100% chance to win. And we wore it all the way every day until we actually won in November. And Kawai-san has not allowed me to wear it in Tokyo, so I thought it was a great honor here to wear it today in honor of President Trump in this speech. I have a great love and fondness for Japan and the Japanese people. I've been coming to Japan since about 1976, 1977. I was a young naval officer in the 7th Fleet on a destroyer that was forward deployed to the East China Sea and the South China Sea for many, many years. And it was during that time that I got to know the people of Asia as a young man, people in Japan, at Yokosuka, Yokohama, people in South Korea, people in Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines. And from that time, had a great love and affinity for Asian culture and Asian people. One of the fundamental reasons, or the most important reason, that Donald Trump is President of the United States is this great global conflict we have right now with China. When I stepped into the campaign in August of 2016, there were only 88 days to go. President Trump, or that time the candidate, was, depending on the poll that you were looking at, was either 10, 12, 14, or 16 points down. He was also down double digits in about every battleground state. And I told him none of those numbers mattered. Only one number mattered. And that was, for the first time in American history, 70% of the American people felt that America was in decline. And the working class people, the workers, both Democrats and Republicans, regardless of their political affiliation, blamed this on America's elite, who they felt didn't care about the country, but only cared about themselves. And I said, Hillary Clinton is the representatives of those elites. And you are the tribune of the people. You're a populist. You're a nationalist. And we could point to a gentleman I call Trump before Trump. That's Prime Minister Abe. Before Bolsonaro in Brazil, before Salvini in Italy, before Orban in Hungary, before Trump in the United States, you had Abe, a man who ran on a platform that his country was in a crisis and that he and his followers could turn it around for the good of the country. From 16 points down, we won at 2:30 in the morning on November 9th of 2016. The greatest single comeback, the most unexpected victory in American history. And Trump, we just focused on 3 things in those last 88 days to close the gap. Number 1, we're going to stop mass illegal immigration and limit legal immigration to protect our workers. African American and Hispanic workers on the low end, and tech workers in regards to legal immigration. Number two, we're going to bring back jobs from China. We're going to bring the manufacturing jobs back from China to the heartland of the country. And number three, we're going to get out of these pointless foreign wars in the Middle East, in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, that have cost us $7 trillion, killed 10,000 American troops, and wounded 40 to 50,000 others. I knew how pointless those wars were, because besides myself being a naval officer for 8 years, my daughter is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, served with the 101st Airborne and fought in Iraq in 2010. And I could tell from her personal experiences what the younger generation, the futility that they felt, that America was frittering away its capital and its young men and women. Those three legs of the stool is what Trump ran on for the last 88 days. And just compared and contrast Hillary Clinton as the representative of what I call the party of Davos. Davos, where the World Economic Forum is held. The scientific, managerial, cultural, financial, business elite of the world. And that Donald Trump would represent what Hillary Clinton called the deplorables, essentially the working men and women of the United States. It's the reason we focused on the great heartland of this country, on Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And you have to remember something, that every day of those last 88 days, every day, all the brilliant commentators in New York City, in London, in Washington, D.C., on TV and in newspapers, and even in Tokyo, all the geniuses that write for the papers and on TV, the commentators, every day mocked and ridiculed our strategy. That Trump's proving he's dumber than people think he is. That Trump has no earthly idea about politics. He's just some out-of-control businessman. That Bannon and these guys around him are just a bunch of right-wing, nativist, racist, xenophobes, homophobes, misogynists, Islamophobes, everything they could throw at us. And our message was very simple, very simple. We're going to bring back jobs to the United States of America. And we're going to stop the managed decline of the United States of America. When we won, very first phone call we got was from Prime Minister Abe's office. He was in, I think, was in Peru, or he was at a conference somewhere. And they wanted to come by to New York. You have to realize that people like myself that have been, for 10 years before Trump ran for president, I've been working on this movement throughout the world, this populist, grassroots, nationalist movement. A movement that considers the nation state, wherever that state is, whether it's Italy or Hungary or Brazil or India or Japan, as the central basic unit of the system we call the Westphalian System, that comes from the Treaty of Westphalia, 300 years old, and that puts the responsibility for the nation state not on a group of a high caste of leaders, but puts the responsibility on citizens. Citizens in Hokkaido, right? The basic building blocks of a society. Prime Minister Abe is a hero to us because he was the first nationalist to win a major election for an industrial power. Prime Minister Abe came by Trump Tower. Now, you have to understand how unprecedented that is. President-elects of the United States do not meet foreign leaders. You have to wait, you traditionally wait until you're sworn in, which would have been 8 or 10 weeks later. But Prime Minister Abe wanted to come by. It's been publicly reported what the conversation was about. The conversation was about one topic: China. We decided at that time that we would have a summit meeting very shortly after President Trump was inaugurated. And in fact, we would again break custom and tradition. Traditionally, in the United States, the president receives the head of the state of Canada, the nation of Canada, or the United Kingdom, our two oldest and closest allies. We broke tradition. I think it was 3 weeks into the Trump administration. Prime Minister Abe was welcomed to the White House and then to Mar-a-Lago, the president's private retreat, his winter White House, because of the personal connection, the personal respect, the personal affinity that he feels for Prime Minister Abe. That weekend in 2 days, one in Washington, D.C. with Prime Minister Abe and his team, and then Mar-a-Lago. The conversation was essentially around one topic. There were other side discussions on trade and other discussions, but the topic was one topic: China. Prime Minister Abe understood before anybody else, and certainly the elites in the United States and in Europe, that what we've allowed to develop over the last 20, 25 years is the most significant danger to world peace and prosperity that's ever been created. And how was it created? Who created it and who profited off this? This is not about the Chinese people. I have a great affinity and love for the Chinese people. I've lived in Shanghai. I've owned businesses in China, in mainland China, in Hong Kong. I spent many, many years in and out of there. I have a great affinity for the noble Chinese people and some of the things that they've gone through. This is about a radical cadre of the Chinese Communist Party. This is a radical cadre of the CCP around President Xi and Wan Xishan and that group of henchmen around him. China is a nation of 1.4 billion people. The Communist Party in China is what, 60 to 80 million people? You look at any of the organization charts, there's essentially 1 million to 5 million people that are decision makers in the whole apparatus. And essentially under 1,000 people matter. And they have run today the world's largest prison, of where they manufacture the world's goods, essentially, with technology, either forced technology transfer from Japan in the United States or stolen, manufactured by slave labor, and essentially exported to the rest of the world, to the unemployed and underemployed, because of their exporting of deflation and overcapacity. Between the time that we won and Prime Minister Abe came to Trump Tower in November, and the time we had the summit meeting with Prime Minister Abe in Mar-a-Lago, the third week of January, kind of right in the middle, there were 2 speeches given. One speech was in Davos at the World Economic Forum, and the other was in Washington, D.C., this is President Trump's inauguration speech. President Xi went to Davos. He was a late add to the program. And the reason was he was going to give a speech that was going to lay out the China dream, Xi thought, the great program of Emperor Xi. And Donald Trump, a few days later, was going to give his inaugural address. Xi's address is one of the most important speeches of the 21st century, and if you have not had a chance to see it or read it, I strongly recommend you do. Because he lays out in quite a bit of detail the Chinese strategy of world domination. And it is world domination. Starts with domination of East Asia, then expands out with the South China Sea and the East China Sea for the control of the Pacific. Then with One Belt, One Road, it goes to the control of the Eurasian landmass, and then through sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean and South America, and then back around. With China at the center of that as an advanced manufacturing empire. In the tributary states of Japan and the United States and the industrial democracies, all essentially administrative units. She lays this out in pretty good detail. Talks about globalization, how successful globalization has been, how it works. The scientific, managerial, engineering, cultural, and financial elite at Davos, and their cocktail parties and all the big shots in the world, with the world's most sophisticated media. You know, the Financial Times of London, The Economist, BBC, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, all of them. Standing ovation for Xi. She's the hero. He's the spokesman for globalism. In this speech, he actually points to where all the world's problems come from. He says, I see where the world's problems come from. It's these nationalists, right? It's these populists. That's the dissenting voice. That's all these grubby folks. You know, it's the followers of Abe. It's the followers of Trump. It's the followers of Salvini. It's the followers of Orban. It's the followers of Le Pen. It's the followers of, ultimately, Bolsonaro or Modi. What they worship in Davos, because Davos is high church. Remember, this is theology. This is a new religion. They have no moral authority. The Financial Times and The Economist and all the smart investment bankers and all the smart commercial bankers, they understand what's going on in China. Everybody understands what's going on in China. They understand the camps of the Uyghurs. They understand the persecution of the Christians. They understand that the democracy movement, what's happened to them. They understand what's happened in Tibet. In Davos, they worship the dollar. The world's economic and financial elite have no moral standing. They detest the social and moral underpinnings of 5,000 years of civilization because they praise a murderous dictator. And history will show how murderous they are. Remember, last year, a Russian oligarch gets poisoned in the city of London, right? If you're in London for 1 month, every day, the tabloids, the BBC, it's the story, that's all they talk about. Khashoggi gets butchered in the consulate in Turkey. A horrible thing, I'm not defending it, but he gets butchered. The House of Saudi Arabia almost falls. It's nonstop. It's the Washington Post, the New York Times. Day after day after day. In China, 500 to 1,000 intellectuals, business leaders, members of the military, members of the establishment either commit suicide, inadvertently fall off 40-story buildings, are missing, are put in prison for life. The chairman of Bannon Insurance Company sentenced to 18 years of hard labor. The chairman and CEO of HNA, the largest financial corporation in the world, privately valued at $1 trillion. The owner of, I think, 20% of Deutsche Bank, falls off a 4-foot wall in France, taking a selfie, dead. #1 actress in the world, missing, still missing. Can't find her. They think they know where she is, but can't find her for tax evasion. 500 to 1,000 elite head of state security for Macau inadvertently gets depressed and falls off a 40-story building. The consolidation, the brutal consolidation of power in China by the Chinese CCP, this radical cadre, is in your face. They don't apologize for it. You have one oligarch in London and it shuts down the city of London. You have one journalist in Turkey from Saudi Arabia and the House of Saudi Arabia almost falls. You have 1,000 prominent achievers in China. They're missing, dead, in prison. Why is the world silent about that? The two systems we're talking about couldn't be more radically different. And there's no compromise between these two systems. I would love to come here and tell you there's a way to compromise. There's a way to do this. Is not. We're at war. They've been at war with us for 20 years. Economic war, information war. The two systems are, the Chinese is a totalitarian mercantilist system with China at its center, and with One Belt, One Road and 5G rollout and Made in China 2025, it's a network effect. Every country will just become an administrative unit. Every citizen will lose essentially its citizenship because you're just being an administrative unit. You become essentially a slave. And that unit, that network effect, is to provide raw materials and sometimes low value added component parts, and to become markets for finished products of Chinese goods. The other systems, the Westphalian system, the system built upon the nation state, which Japan, the United States, Canada, Mexico, Western Europe, and all of our other allies, based upon free men and women that have the responsibility for their nation on their shoulders. And they can decide if they're going to go into alliances or not into alliances. They can decide if they're going to be partners or not partners. But at that nation state level and at the lowest level possible, people make their own decisions. They're called citizens. People, when I give this talk, or in Washington, when I was working on the changing the focus of the United States government to actually understand that we're at war, they go, "Oh, Bannon, you're crazy. This is more of your craziness. This is more of your madness," right? I said, "Oh, it's madness?" They said, "Yeah, China is not expansionist. China's never been an expansionist power. It's China. It's always been together. Sometimes it's broken up and separated, but sometimes it's together. But they don't try to take over other countries." I said, "We just came through the bloodiest century in mankind's history, the 20th century, what we lost, 250, 300, 350, 400 million people. Wars, revolutions, starvation, great leaps forward, add it all up, right? The new dark age. 1,000 years from now, they'll look back at it, a new dark age, right? There are three great geopolitical strategies from that era. Number one is a Scottish geographer called Harold Mackinder that laid out a very simple thesis. He who controls the heartland of the Eurasian landmass controls the world island. And he who controls that controls the world. It's what Hitler and the Soviets tried to do. The second theory is a gentleman named Sir Alfred Mahan. And Mahan's the naval strategy that was followed by the British Royal Navy, the American Navy, the Imperial Navy. That is, control the ocean's choke points of South China Sea and the Straits of Malacca and Singapore and Djibouti and Suez and Gibraltar and the Panama Canal and Cape Town, and you will control the world because it's the ocean choke points that control the world island. Then a gentleman named Speakman said, "Hey, I got the oceans, I got the landmass, but they're both incorrect. What Its key is the rim around the world island. It is East Asia, in India, and up around Pakistan, in the Persian Gulf. If you control that in Eastern Europe, you will control the world. We fought for 70 or 80 years in the 20th century choosing one of those strategies. Central part of American national security strategy since World War I is very simple. Regardless you're Republican or Democrat, we will never allow one power to control the Eurasian landmass, ever. If you look at what the Chinese have done, it is the most ambitious, the most audacious, the most aggressive geopolitical strategy in the history of man. They've taken all three at one time and combined it into one grand strategy. One Belt, One Road, made in China 2025, in the 5G rollout. One Belt, One Road, all One Belt, One Road does is take the British East India Company model and just run it in reverse, right? Brits had a pretty good idea back then. They were smart guys. They go, all this treasure, all this resources, all these people. We're a tiny island. We can't do it all. But we'll farm it out to a company, and they'll do it. And the company had a pretty good strategy. We will go into the local elites and buy them off, right? They'll essentially work for us as partners. They'll be the junior partner. We'll use predatory capitalism. We'll lend them a bunch of money, which they can't possibly pay back, right? And then we'll foreclose when they can't pay back, and we'll control the assets. That's One Belt, One Road. Forget the highways and the dams and the hydroelectric plants, all that. Yeah, it's all different at every different point in time, but that's what they're doing. And don't ask me, go to the Seychelles, go to Maldives, go to Sri Lanka, go to Sub-Saharan Africa, go into Latin America, and ask the local leaders what they're doing. It's a network, and that network, and by the way, they announced on Wednesday they're going to be in Italy on the 21st and 22nd, where they're going to try to talk the Italian government into anchoring One Belt, One Road, exactly where Marco Polo started the Silk Road, right there in Venice, with a $10 billion check, right? And to take control of the port in Venice, use that as the basis of a railway system up through Europe. One Belt, One Road. Made in China 2025. Made in China 2025 is, they say point blank, by 2025, they will be the dominant advanced manufacturer of the world. Not Japan, not the United States, not Western Europe, and not the combination of the 7 great industrial powers combined will not be that. Advanced chip design, robotics, and artificial intelligence, the convergence of those three will make them the advanced manufacturing. And here's the beauty of it, and they're proud of it. How much of that did they create? 0. How many Nobel Prize winners are there in China? 1.4 billion people, the second biggest economy in the world. What? Japanese economy is $5 trillion. They're at, what, $14 trillion? How many Nobel Prize winners? I think they got 1 in medicine. 1. 1 in medicine. Forced technology transfers from Japan and the United States and Western Europe has given them, they have essentially, they try to steal your intellectual property, they do industrial espionage, but the point is they forced it. They forced it, and our elites went along with it. It's the reason we don't make Apple products and Boeing jets anymore in the United States. We make them in China. Why? Apple and Boeing and all these companies in the United States, just like the companies in Japan, all have joint ventures. They take your intellectual property. The beating heart of Western capitalism is innovation. They figured out a system to get it for free. And then 5G rollout. Remember, 5G is not 2, 3, 4G, and then 5G. It's not a linear progression. 5G is a totally new, it's the future of technology. It is the basis of quantum computing. It's geometrically different than 4G. 5G is about data. Every device in the world, every person in the world, every company, every production process, every piece of intellectual property in mankind's history will be tied into one system. In the 5G world, data is the new plutonium and can be weaponized and will be weaponized as a weapon. In Huawei, and let's say what Huawei is. Huawei's not a company. Huawei's not just some telecommunications company or IT company. It's not like NTT, or it's not like Verizon. It's not like Bell Atlantic or AT&T. Huawei is the People's Liberation Army, right? It's their telecommunication front. It's not an independent company. Why do you think the Canadians, the least aggressive people in the world, at the Americans' request, arrested the chief financial officer? And why is she being extradited to the United States of America? The People's Liberation Army uses Huawei to get into the phone systems and to do the phone systems cheaply. And we'll do it. Hey, we'll do it. They control the data. They control the total system. You combine One Belt, One Road and Made in China 2025 and Huawei's rollout of 5G. And in the next, not 50 years, not 40 years, not 30 years, in 5 to 10 years, they have a complete integrated global system. In Japan, in the United States, the great allies over 70 years are tributary states. We're a tributary state today. Look at the trade negotiations. We are Jamestown, the United States of America, the greatest industrial power on earth, is Jamestown to their Great Britain. It's the reason you can't make the trade deal and just on tariffs work. We ship them soybeans and wheat and corn and timber and liquefied and natural gas and oil and liquefied natural gas, but not the Boeing jets and not the Apple products, because that's already being made over there. China's greatest export is one of the reasons of the central beating heart of the problem in Japan and its economy. And you see this throughout the world, or maybe not as advanced. China's greatest export is deflation and overcapacity. That's why you can't raise prices. That's why you can't raise wages. It's China's state-owned industries. They do it for political reasons. And remember, they do it on a financial Ponzi scheme. China's financial system is a complete and total Ponzi scheme. The guys in the investment bank, I worked at Goldman Sachs. I went to Harvard Business School. I can do basic arithmetic, right? People at Goldman Sachs know this. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's a total Ponzi scheme. Let me give you a couple of statistics to show you what a Ponzi scheme it is. Total assets in U.S. banks are about $19 trillion, assets being basically essentially the loan portfolio. I would respectfully submit that maybe up to 10%, that's the most regulated, transparent banking system in the world, controlled by the Federal Reserve. I would respectfully submit maybe 10% of those total assets maybe don't perform so well. But they're kept on the books of what they're kept on the books at, because as you know, if you had to write them off, that would cause a real perturbation in the system. China has a banking system that's totally non-transparent. We have no earthly idea what goes on. It's got a secondary, black market, the trade and everything like that. Chinese banks, completely, the financial statements don't make any sense. Nobody can make head nor tails of any of them. It's a totally non-regulated system. Here's why it's non-regulated. The Bank of Tokyo reports to itself, not to Abe. The Federal Reserve reports to itself, not to Trump. The Bank of England reports to itself, not to Theresa May. The European Central Bank reports to itself. Every major central bank in the world is a self-contained entity with no, hopefully, political influence. Bank of China reports directly to Xi, only major central bank in the world. The Chinese banks have $49 trillion of assets. And when the financial crash happened in 2008, they had $5 trillion. Now, I would respectfully submit that 80% of those assets are non-performing. Yet the Chinese just keep printing RMB. They printed $35 trillion RMB. One of the parts of the scam of One Belt, One Road, what they're doing in the Persian Gulf, they'll bring in the engineers, they'll bring in, but they pay them in RMB. They got to burn off the RMB, right? It's a total and complete Ponzi scheme. And the world's elite made a fortune off setting up the Ponzi scheme. And it's the world's workers in the industrial democracies that have paid the price. We have a semi-feudal system. Workers don't own anything. The wages they make today are 20% behind where their parents are. The demographic problem in Japan is the same as the United States and Western Europe. It's about family formation. Family formation happens later. Every poll we have, the central reason's always the same: economic anxiety. Couples can't figure out how to make 2 and 3 kids work anymore. Why? Because we export. China exports deflation and overcapacity. The Chinese lay it out. If you haven't read this book, I recommend you get it. It's kind of like my Bible. Got it years ago. Unrestricted Warfare. It's a PLA, People's Liberation Army document, written in 1999 by 2 PLA, People's Liberation Army colonels, who are both major generals today. In fact, the South China Morning Post just had a big story about 6 weeks ago how the 2 colonels say, yeah, you know, Bannon kind of misinterpreted what we were saying, right? But I said, you just got to read it. Just read the book. They lay it out. 20 years ago, 1999, right after China became in the World Trade Organization and the most favored nation. Remember, back in those days, everybody was saying, hey, China's going to be wealthy, China's going to be middle class, they're going to have democracy. As soon as they start making stuff and making like the rest of the nations, they're going to join the family of nations. Yeah, well, that's not what the PLA and the CCP were planning. Never intended it. They say there's 3 types of warfare: information, economic, and kinetic, or guns up. And they say, hey, look, when you look at these industrial democracies led by the United States of America, they understand kinetic warfare, right? We can never get into a situation where we're at war with these guys. We have to do it a different way, and the way we're going to do it is through information cyber warfare and economic warfare. They have been directly engaged in economic warfare against the industrial democracies for 20 years. And you look at David Cameron, who's been bought off after he's the Prime Minister of England. You look at Joe Biden. When Joe Biden starts running, look at the $1 billion the Chinese gave his kid for a private equity fund. On a guy that's never run a private equity fund is like $1 billion, of which Joe Biden's been sucking down cash. Goldman Sachs, Blackstone, all the big commercial banks, bought and paid for as the investor relations department of the Chinese Communist Party. Why? Because they've made a fortune. This is the heart of what the trade negotiations with Trump. Every day they're on Trump nonstop about, you know, these tariffs, and you gotta, you know, the stock market's going to go down, it's going to crash economy. You gotta cut a deal with them. What Lighthizer done is put out 6 verticals: forced technology transfer, intellectual property theft, currency manipulation, non-trade barriers, the state-owned industry subsidies. Bang, 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 bang. You get the deal Lighthizer wants, you're going to start to deconstruct the Chinese economy and merge it into free market capitalism. And the pressure is not from the Chinese. Pick up the Wall Street Journal, pick up the Financial Times, pick up the New York Times. The pressure is from the investment banks and the commercial banks and the global corporate chieftains. We have created a system where we have slave labor in China that manufactures for unemployed and underemployed people throughout the rest of the world at a cheap price. That's what we've sold ourselves out for. You don't need a Harvard MBA, and you don't have to work at Goldman Sachs to understand that, because I'll tell you who understands it. When Trump went to Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in Iowa, when he's in Youngstown, in Dearborn, in Madison, in Pittsburgh, working class people understand it. You don't have to have some highfalutin theoretical discussion with them. You don't need to talk about Mackinder and all this stuff. They get it. There's a guy named J.D. Vance. He's a Marine Corps officer that went to Yale, that wrote the kind of definitive book about the Trump movement and the sociology related to the deplorables. This book is called Hillbilly Elegies. And he cites in the book, because it's all about the working class in the Midwest. He wrote in the book, he cites studies from MIT and Harvard that show a direct correlation between the factories that went to China, the billets that went with them, and the opioid crisis. The tariffs are not just taxes on goods. The tariffs are about human dignity and self-worth of your workers. They can't work at McDonald's. They can't work at telemarketing centers. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. Donald Trump understood that. Donald Trump gave a voice to the voiceless. Donald Trump, how do you think Donald Trump got all these Democrats, working class Democrats, to vote for him? That was it. They understand that America's elite sold out the country, and that Hillary Clinton was just more of the elitist. And by the way, the elite is not by political party. This is many Republicans as Democrats have done this. The solution is in front of us. Solution is the strength of this alliance. We've had an alliance for 70 years, Japan and the United States of America, in good times and bad times, on good days and bad days, in Vietnam's and when the wall came down in Berlin. And that alliance has gone through a lot. We've got an alliance in Western Europe with the industrial democracies. Trump's not trying to destroy that alliance. Remember, what Trump said is NATO's got to pay the 2% they said they were going to pay. It was Jan Stoltenberg, the officer general, secretary general of NATO, that came to us and said, you've got to help me make these guys pay up. Since Trump's been there, $100 billion by European countries for their own defense. America first does not mean America isolationist. Doesn't mean America alone. Doesn't mean America by herself. It's a different way to look at the world. It means where it's in the vital national security interest of the United States of America. It will also be in the vital national security interest of our local partners and allies. From Northwest Europe and NATO to the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea to the Northwest Pacific, we're not an imperial power. We're not looking for protectorates. We're looking for allies. Since I've been coming here as a young naval officer in 76, 77, the United States at senior level has never been more engaged in the Northwest Pacific and the South China Sea ever. Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, Bill Hagerty, the ambassador to Japan, John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, and Lighthizer, Ambassador Lighthizer, every day are focused on the issues of the Northwest Pacific. The principal issue we're trying to get sorted is Korea. But here's what's happened. It's now looked at in the overall context of China, the way it should be. Not for 30 years looking the other way and thinking it was just about North Korea and it's just some arms deal, arms control matter. Korea is a vassal state of China. They wouldn't have the ability to weaponize plutonium. They wouldn't have the ability for the ballistic missiles. They wouldn't have the ability for the warhead technology. And as John Bolton said the other day when he added chemical and biological weapons to the deal, they wouldn't have any of that capability unless the Chinese helped them out. We think, and this is publicly disclosed, that they may have a hydrogen bomb. The probability, the difference between an atomic bomb and a hydrogen bomb of complexity is like to the order of 10. The probability the North Koreans came up with their own hydrogen bomb is 0. And President Trump understands that, and that's why you're seeing these ongoing tough negotiations. A central part of this alliance eventually has to be Russia. If you say that in Washington, D.C., they'll burn me at the stake, right? Remember, they make Russia out to be this... Russia's economy is the size of New York State. Russia is in a demographic death spiral. Russia has, I think, 90% of their revenue comes from natural resources. They don't make anything, and they certainly don't make anything the world wants to buy. They have a lot of nuclear weapons, a lot of military, and they're bad guys. But you know what? We've been in business with bad guys on and off for a long time. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's what I think what Prime Minister Abe is trying to do and bring the end to World War II with the Russians in Japan is one of the most important pieces of this. Putin is, he's a nationalist, right? But they are former KGB guys, and they're kleptocrats. We're all sophisticated enough. People understand that. But over the long term, they're going to be central. They have to be on our side of the football. It's the reverse game plan Nixon and them ran on Russia with China. We need Russia on our side of the football, and it's going to be very tough, and it is the great wisdom of Prime Minister Abe and the Japanese people that will bring that, I think, into the alliance. Because step one is you've got to bring the curtain down on World War II, right? Just like in the Korean Peninsula, eventually you got to bring the curtain down on the Korean War. These scars are very deep, and they're living things today. But that's why we have people like Prime Minister Abe. That's why you have people like Donald Trump. People in Japan should understand something. Every waking moment of the President of the United States' life and his Secretary of State and his National Security Advisor and his Ambassador to Japan, Haggerty, who he thinks very highly of, is focused on safety and security in the Northwest Pacific. That's never happened in the history of the United States. So they can mock and ridicule Donald Trump. They can call him a buffoon and a moron and all the things they call him every day. And this is what they think of him. Let's be brutally frank about this. He's over there for a quite complicated negotiation, as I don't need to tell this audience. And while he's over there on a master plan to get, in one fell swoop, a total denuclearization, to take off sanctions, and to bring North Korea into the family of economic nations with massive cash infusion to help build their industries, while he's doing that, the Democrats decide they're going to put his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, on at the exact same time on world TV so that Cohen can call him a racist and a con man and a cheat and a scumbag. And so when you look at CNN, okay, throughout the world, it's got Michael Cohen sitting there, and the picture down here is Trump and Kim. That's what the Democratic Party thinks about safety and security of the Japanese people and the Korean people and the people in the Philippines in the Northwest Pacific. That's what they're telling you what they think. Just like on the night of the dinner we held in Prime Minister Abe's honor at Mar-a-Lago, right in the middle of dinner, Kim lights off a ballistic missile test aimed right at Japan to say, hey, tough guys, I see you're plotting over there in Florida. I'm going to show you what I got. Remember, we stopped dinner, did a joint communique, had a live press conference. At Mar-a-Lago had a live press conference, I think at 1 o'clock in the morning, so it could be live to Japanese TV here on Sunday morning. And then we went through Little Rocket Man and went through Fire and Fury and all the president's tweets, but Elise got into a process that's going to have fits and starts, a process that's going to have good days and bad days, but a process where you have engaged the most powerful nation on earth, the United States, still today, in the safety and security of not just people on the West Coast of the United States, but the safety and security of our allies, our 70-year allies in the nation of Japan. We have a very long and tough road ahead of us. And your children and your grandchildren are going to have a harder and tougher road unless we do our duty. History is going to judge us. It's going to weigh and measure us. It's going to weigh and measure us against this great hegemonic war with a totalitarian, mercantilist society run by a radical cadre of an atheistic government. Emperor Xi and his henchmen versus 5,000 years from Athens to Jerusalem to Rome to London to the United States to Europe to Japan to South Korea. The industrial democracies. Now, I like being on our side of the football, and I like my teammates. But this is going to be unflinching. And it's going to get called into question every piece of moral fiber we have, every piece of toughness we have to win. But there's no middle ground. One side's going to win this, and one side's going to lose it. And history at the end of the day is going to judge us, each and every one of you. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, of what we did individually and collectively to stop this madness. Donald Trump won because of divine providence. I was there, I saw it. He's a very imperfect instrument, but he's an instrument. He's there for a reason and a purpose. And I've had good days with him, and I've had other days that are less than good. But where he's trying to drive us, and Prime Minister Abe is trying to drive us, and Bolsonaro is trying to drive us, and Salvini and Orban and the rest, is to victory. Thank you very much.
Steve Bannon さん、ご講話誠にありがとうございました。